The Economy and Infrastructure Committee public hearing for the inquiry into the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the tourism and event sectors continues. Please ensure that mobile phones are switched to silent and that any background noise is minimised. I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I wish to welcome any members of the public that are watching via the live broadcast. My name's Em Veredigan and I'm Chair of the Economy and Infrastructure Committee, and I'd like to introduce my fellow committee members that are present with us here today. Mr Quilty, Mr Barton, Mr Talamas, Ms Lovell, Mr Davis and Mr MacArthur. To the witness of hearing, all evidence taken at this hearing is protected by parliamentary privilege as provided by the Constitution Act 1975 and further subject to provisions of the Legislative Council standing orders. Therefore, the information you provide during this hearing is protected by law. However, any comment repeated outside the hearing may not be protected. Any deliberately false evidence or misleading of the committee may be considered a contempt of Parliament. All evidence is being recorded. You'll be provided for proof version of the transcript following the hearing. Transcripts will ultimately be made public on the committee's website. We welcome your opening comments, but ask that they be kept to a maximum of 5 to 10 minutes to allow plenty of time for discussion. Could you please begin by stating your name for the benefit of our Hansard team and then begin your presentation. Over to you, Julia.
Thank you. My name is Julia Robinson from the Australian Festival Association. I'd like to also first start by saying that I'm a proud Wiradjuri woman coming to you from the lands of the Gadigal and Bidjigal peoples, and pay my deep respect to their elders and acknowledge any First Nations people here today. Sovereignty was never ceded, it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. The Australian Festival Association, or the AFA as we're known, would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to contribute to this inquiry into the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the tourism and events sectors. The AFA was established in 2018 to represent the shared interests of the festival industry. Our members include festival promoters and organisers, as well as suppliers, venues, councils and sole traders working within the sector. Tourism and festivals, particularly in the regions, are linked in a mutually beneficial way. Festivals both drive and are driven by tourism. Australian festivals deliver considerable economic and employment benefits to this country, with the latest data revealing ticket revenue contributed $2.7 billion output in 2019 and just under 10,000 full-time equivalent jobs. With some 42% of Australians attending festivals each and every year, this is an industry that many are connected to. According to the same research, the Victorian share of this economic output was $390 million to this state and 1,310 full-time equivalent jobs. In 2020, those figures plummeted by 86%. It is important to note that these figures only capture ticketed events, with impacts much higher when taking into account community and free-flowing or non-ticketed festivals. The AFA acknowledges the current funding and supports available through and projects funded by Creative Victoria for the festival industry, as well as the general business supports that were available from the Victorian government. We also recognise targeted federal funding in the form of RISE has been recently extended by a further $125 million, taking this to $200 million. And that was alongside other industry supports. Funding for the industry has generally been welcomed by the AFA. However, even with these supports, the industry is still facing some key issues. Number one is business confidence. It's low, with continued snap lockdowns seeing cancellations and the unavailability to ensure events and festivals against COVID-related closures. Number two is a recent dip in consumer confidence in some areas of the market due to those continued festival cancellations and postponements, as well as border closures. A third is COVID restrictions and the constant moving goalposts for a business that usually takes 12 to 18 months to plan their event. Artist availability is the fourth, both within Australia and the inability to secure talent from overseas due to mandatory quarantine. The fifth is border closures within the country across state lines has caused issues with events being cancelled and artist availability for those events. And then six is skills losses. And when we do get up and running, the shortages that might be faced by festivals when reopening at scale with things like security, first aid and hospitality. Of these, though, the first issue is most concerning. The inability to ensure events is the largest barrier to business as usual operation. And while we know it's also complicated to execute in the current environment, it is the single issue that, if solved, could have the greatest impact. Festivals are months, even years in the planning to produce a single event that many businesses rely on for their entire year of income. Many businesses are simply not willing to risk yet another year without income, and indeed with the additional losses to put on their event. Once again, I thank the committee for their time today and welcome any questions now.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you and the Australian Festivals Association for your submission and your presentation today. What I'll do is I'll pass over to committee members to ask questions, and we'll go around. I'll start with Mr Davis, then Mr Talamas.
So just to understand thank you for your submission, Julia. Just to understand the insurance side of this further, an industry-led business interruption approach, I don't see any reason personally, and you may tell me different, why there couldn't be a scheme similar to what is operated with some medical insurances and similar to what is operated with the extreme events groups in the early 2000s when insurance disappeared, and the state government taking a levy from each part of the sectors came in and through the VMIA, the Victorian Managed Insurance Authority, actually provided an underwriting for the sector. Is there any reason why that model couldn't work?
Well, look, I'm unaware of the inner workings of how that would work, but that is what we're asking for. That is what we would like, and we feel that we've put together a bit of a case for that, and the fact that it sort of there is precedence that has existed, and that also we can provide and have provided sort of policy documents as to what types of insurance we were previously able to get, because understanding that the industry is complex and there are a lot of moving parts, so we do understand there is a bit of complexity there, but we can go through those details and put the case forward. But it's, as I said, it's the single most important factor for us at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I might actually go next now. I do have a question. Are you and your member organisations concerned that we don't have a set date for the vaccine rollout now? And how do you expect that to affect your members in terms of confidence?
Yeah, it's pretty important. It did cause a bit of a stir last week with the announcement that the borders will remain shut for well into next year. The vaccine rollout will have a massive impact. And if it's delayed, it will further delay, as I sort of mentioned, with those artists coming in from overseas, which, whilst it's great for our Australian sort of artists and talent here, we are an ecosystem, and, when one part's broken, the other part doesn't work. So it's going to have a huge impact, a delayed vaccine rollout. And then even with the vaccine rollout, we're still unsure as to whether that will allow events of scale to operate as they used to. It's still not been discussed or sort of proven how that would happen in the United States at the moment. They're holding large-scale events and they've separated areas into vaccinated, partially vaccinated, unvaccinated. We're still unsure whether that will have an impact moving forward as well.
No, thank you for that. I might pass over to Mr Quilty to ask a question.
I don't have a question at this stage.
Okay, no problem. Ms Lovell?
I just wanted to explore the confidence of the sector to actually start planning for events. We saw the Blues Festival, in Byron Bay cancelled recently. So what's the confidence in the sector, and what do they need to restore their confidence to to plan for events like the Falls Festival or something that we have here in Victoria?
Yeah, look, confidence is just low. Smaller events, there's a bit of confidence there. We can have something, I guess, under 5,000 people relatively easily, especially if it's seated. But in terms of getting back to business as usual, as you mentioned with Falls Festival or some of the larger scale, free-flowing, general admission festivals, business confidence is pretty low, and it's multifaceted. So I guess I went through some of the issues. The insurance is one. An almost equally as important issue is the availability of the talent. So if we're talking about music festivals, we have had a great 18 months of just Australian-only artists playing, which has been excellent for that part of the industry. But as I mentioned, it's an ecosystem. Australian artists are sort of buoyed by internationals and vice versa. So you need to have a bit of a blend. Not all the Australian artists that we've got are sort of ready to be at the top end of a lineup. So yeah, it's an ecosystem that's not currently functioning. So Business confidence is relatively low. It's one of those tricky things as well to navigate, I guess, from advocacy and then sort of public advocacy as well, because you are mindful that talking about business confidence being low and not wanting to put on events because of the risk of cancelling could affect consumer behaviour. But likewise, you need to get the advocacy out there that the business confidence is low and we need help. So it's a really tricky line for us to also play from that respect.
So what's the top two or three things that the state government could do to assist you to restore confidence in your sector?
So certainly some type of business interruption fund, and we've been open about being willing to pay for a premium if that was what was required. So like an insurance premium, previous costs were around 1% of cost of cover. So we've been upfront about being it's not even kind of fully funded. It's partially funded by industry. So business interruption fund would be number one. We are also very interested in talking through the limitations and the availability of bringing in international artists with some type of augmented quarantine system.
We can do it for tennis players, so we should be able to do it for artists.
Yeah, so something like that. Having said that, of course, the artists that are now that we would want to bring in from the US and the UK and Europe and now have the ability to tour their country and also internationally to some extent without quarantine. So we've seen a recent drop in those conversations being as palatable. So with promoters trying to get artists on their bill, the sell of you have to fly here, however long that takes from wherever your country is, quarantine for 14 days, and then you can start playing your shows. Is a bit of a hard ask now that they can just tour their country without quarantine. So some type of discussion around that. And then with the border closures state by state, we've just seen it doesn't necessarily just affect the state that's shut down. If artists are coming from interstate or if indeed patrons are coming from interstate, a state border closure really can impact any part of the country and any part of our festival ecosystem. So that would be the third one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I might pass on to Mr. Barton, then Ms. MacArthur.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Julia. You mentioned before about the clearly the insurance issue is the thing, and you said the industry should perhaps paying 1%. How do you see that as a levy on events?
So the way. The way that we have presented it is that it would be a 1% cost to ensure the coverage that you need. So in the same way that the previous version of what we would get pre-COVID was called ticket cancellation insurance. And that would cover all manner of things that may cause a cancellation and therefore the ticket to be cancelled, so weather, etc.
Yep.
And then the line that's been taken out is just pandemic or communicable disease.
Yep.
So that's just no longer available. So yeah, it would just be a 1% fee of cost of cover is what it used to cost. And that, just to be clear, the event organisers and promoters would still be paying that to their normal insurer for all of the normal range of cancellations. This would just be over and above, so it's going over and above just to cover that cancellation related to COVID.
Thanks, Julia. Just on that, you're obviously talking about your festival industry. Would that work across the other aspects of the event industry? Are you aware what they pay?
Yeah, so that particular insurance is not just for festivals, it is for all types of ticketed events. So that's just a good example of a policy that exists for a ticketed show, and whether that ticket costs $5 or $500, it would still work the same way.
Yep.
So yes, in my limited other event experience, it should be possible for some kind of ticket cancellation.
Thanks, Julia. That's great.
Thank you, Julia. I might pass over to Ms. MacArthur.
Thank you.
I'm sure Ms. MacArthur's interested in this extra 1% levy or tax.
Well, what I'm interested in, Chair, is whether the one thing we could do is get a guarantee from our state premiers who operate like emperors half the time to end border lockdowns. So we're one island state here. Don't you think it'd be feasible that we could operate like one people instead of a series of fiefdoms? And if we've got a case here or there, we could actually just isolate that particular area instead of closing borders and locking down whole states?
I'm unsure if that's a question. Is that a question?
Yeah, that's a question. Do you agree?
Where's the question? I saw
Do
the
you
statement.
agree?
The question, please.
The question is, do you think we can put an end to these premiers locking down, closing borders?
I wouldn't hazard to answer that specifically on behalf of the premiers, but it certainly would.
Well, we'll make you one soon if you could.
one of the issues is certainly border closures. So, as a recent example, when the Perth shutdown happened, we had a member that had 3 shows booked for that state, but then also 2 further shows booked for Darwin and the region that you don't get to very often, being an East Coast company. So they had to move the Perth shows and then forego one of the Darwin shows because the timing was just not going to work and the border closures affected them so much. So border closures are certainly a massive issue for us, and particularly for artists, and sort of getting that essential worker status would really assist with the border closure issues for us, for our perspective.
Well, regardless of what the rest of the world does, that would seem an easy solution that we could make in this country.
Thank you, Mr. MacArthur. On that point, Mr. Quilty, do you have a question now, or we might continue? Okay, thank you. Mr. Quilty? Okay. What I might do is, because we started late and to afford the committee members some fair time, I'll allow one more question if committee members have. Does anyone have an additional question? One additional question each.
I do have an additional
Yes,
question.
Mr. Davis.
Do you have you seen any of the health advice on which this sector has been closed down? The events sector has been closed down. Have you ever been able to engage with one of the governments to see this, the Victorian government in particular?
It's a very good question, actually, in terms of pointing to specific citations. In the reverse, I do provide a lot of,
Assistance to them.
Assistance, yeah. I mean, I see a lot of what's happening overseas. There's been a lot of recent examples of test cases and things like that coming out of the UK in particular, where they're doing test festivals and test concerts. And I think there was just one report that came out today saying that of a 3,000 person concert, or it was a nightclub type event, that there was no increased risk over and above what you'd see in a shopping centre environment. So it's a particularly interesting one for us, and we do provide that information, and I do understand that it's changing all the time. But I guess specifically, other than what's available in what we use, which is the public events framework, anything that's cited in any of those pieces of roadmap and documentation that are provided to us, not specific to any changes with recent sort of festival examples. We don't get that directly, no.
And the Victorian rules were it was obviously longer down here, but they're harsher for the events sector, including still the arrangements that are in place for numbers and density and so forth, still harsher than New South Wales or Queensland. Have you engaged with the government down here on that, dichotomy that exists?
I would actually respectfully disagree to some extent.
Happy to share the tables with you.
No, but please elaborate.
I guess, so we operate in every state and territory. We've got members across every state and territory. And whilst it's actually kind of almost impossible to compare each state and territory because the baselines are just not the same. So it's just not apples and apples. My quoted saying is that it's a complete fruit salad out there, which I'm happy to go on Hansard. But is that it just... It's very hard to compare, but if I was to go through a New South Wales versus Victoria type environment, Victoria's public events framework does at least provide some good guidance for festival organisers in particular of how they could go over and above what's laid out, whereas in New South Wales it's a little bit less clear.
But you might never hear from them. That's the problem. You might try to get a variation.
Final question, final comment. I know Mr. Barton.
That's what's put to me by people in the sector.
Mr. Barton?
Yeah, look, there are limitations with all of the states and territories, I must say, but I guess there is a lot of there's a lot of room to move with all of them as well. So, and we're able to provide that feedback.
And we might grab that study if possible. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Thank you for that. Mr. Barton has an additional question.
Thank you, Chair. Julia, we've heard today that one of the problems and frustrations from the industry, the events industry, is that they couldn't get access to government and have their concerns heard. We heard about a round table that's sort of, at the time when it was needed most throughout COVID, didn't sit. My question to you is two parts. One, are you involved, are you on that committee, on that round table? And the other part is, are you dealing with government directly, or you've had no engagement with the government?
Yeah, so to the first part, yes, I have been a part of many of the roundtables that have happened, and understand that they kind of move in a timetable that fits in with the COVID outbreaks that are happening at the time, or the relieving of restrictions as well. So they are not, not in set timelines. But then to the second, I am also in good contact with through our colleagues at. Through our contacts at Creative Victoria, we're able to feed information through to the Department of Health and to the DJPR on the public events framework as well.
What did you tell me?
But I do recognise that some of those roundtables and did get feedback from some of the roundtables that it was limited in the ability to sort of have a bit of back and forth and provide real case studies as to how hard it is to work our way through, navigate the systems and work our way through to putting on an event. So I have recognised that there are some limitations there, but do appreciate being able to be a part of those roundtables. And, sometimes you just have to make sure that you're sitting at one of those tables in whatever way you can. That's sort of my job, is to try and get at those tables and to get at this table.
Fantastic, Julia. Thank you.
I'd say Ms. McArthur might ask the final question of the day.
Well, look, I'm just wondering, Julia, if you think you'd have been better off if you were in the tennis, football or cricket game or even the racing industry to get your events up and going, because they've seemed to have been accommodated here in Victoria. Would you be better with a tennis racket or something in your hand?
Definitely. Yeah, I think all of our artists would have been better off on a horse or with a tennis racket.
Yeah.
I think that's not just Victoria, that's nationally. We're a sporting nation and unafraid to sort of say that, I think. But, we do all engage with the arts, and we do all engage with music on a daily basis. And as I said at the beginning, with 42% of people actually attending festivals each year, that's almost half of us are going to something of that nature. But unfortunately, we just don't have the TV rights and we don't have Sportsbet. So
but we all need to get on our horse and get going, Julia, don't we?
We do, yes.
Now, on that note,
That happy note.
I'm on that happy note. I want to thank you, Julia, and Australian Festivals Association. It's great to hear from another, a festivals and events sector representative. On that note, it concludes our hearings for today, but it was a pleasure to speak to you and